I'm Lori Flaquet of Soltar Solutions, and I am here today on Focus Forward with a terrific guest. He's coming to us from far, far away. He's going to tell you all about it. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about Guerrilla Marketing Goes Green. Shel Horowitz wrote this book, and it is fabulous. I spent time reading it. It helps business owners not only understand more about marketing, but also about going green. And there's tips in here that allow us to go green gradually, doing simple things that we would, could spend a few dollars changing. So it's not like we have to spend thousands of dollars to put the solar panels on the house next week. We can just do a few simple things. I recommend everyone get this book. It's phenomenal. It'll save you money. And also, it teaches a lot about marketing. And who can't learn a little bit more about marketing? So right now, I am so excited to be introducing Bobby Casey here, and he is from Global Wealth Protection. Bobby, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Hi,
thanks for having me. How are you this evening? Or this, I guess, evening for me, afternoon for you.
Yeah, it's actually morning here. Bobby, tell us.
Oh, that's right. Still morning. Okay.
Yeah, it's still morning. Yeah, it's like 11:30 or 11 o'clock. I don't even know. Bobby, tell us where you are.
I live in a little tiny country on the Baltic Sea called Latvia, and I live in the capital city, Riga. For those of you that don't know, which seems to be most Americans, it is a tiny little country. Latvia only has about 2 million people. And we border Russia to the east. We're on the Baltic Sea, almost due east from Stockholm, Sweden. And like I said, the country's about 2 million people. The city I live in, Riga, is it's about 1 million people.
Wow, cool. Now tell us, how did you get there?
Well, I guess I owned a company several years ago that was based solely in the U.S. We did some various service work in the U.S. We covered about 2/3 of the U.S., 17,000 zip codes. And I guess I got a little maybe burnout with the company. I owned it about 12 or 13 years. My wife and I have been talking for a few years about living abroad and traveling a lot and that sort of thing. And I just decided to sell the company and said, what the heck, let's give it a shot. So I had some friends that had lived in Estonia, which is the next country north of Latvia, and I studied Russian in school. Actually, I have with my undergraduate degree, I have a minor in Russian, and so in school I'd studied Russian, and I thought, that'd be kind of cool to live in a, one of the former Soviet countries and maybe get to practice some Russian. And so we had some friends that said, yeah, you'll love Estonia, it's a great place. So we'd never been. I had been to Russia a few times on some business trips and visiting some friends and adventure stuff, but we'd never been to Estonia. We just bought one-way plane tickets and left. And we literally showed up. Actually, I went about 2 or 3 weeks with my middle son. 2 or 3 weeks early with my middle son. And we actually flew into Prague, went to a motorcycle race, we took trains and buses and that sort of thing around Europe, kind of backpacking, just father-son thing. We literally arrived the name of the town was Tartu, which is the second largest city in Estonia. We literally arrived in Tartu with a 2-night reservation at a hostel, just for the two of us. And I think it was about a week later, my wife and other 2 kids were showing up via plane. And so my son, Will, and we basically just went around looking for apartments, trying to figure out what to do with school and all this stuff. And we just figured it out. And then after living there for about a year, we still had a house and stuff, all the stuff people have. We still had the stuff back in the U.S., and we decided to move back to the U.S. just long enough to liquidate everything, all of our physical possessions in the U.S., which we did. And we were in the interim trying to decide where to move. And we really liked the Baltic region in general. We really just loved Eastern Europe. And so it was kind of like, let's pick another place there. Okay, let's go to Riga. So then we just bought one-way plane tickets to Riga. Now, we had been to Riga before visiting in the area, but we'd never obviously live there. But yep, that's it. Just kind of, let's do it. Let's go.
Well, that is an amazing story. You are my hero, honestly. How old was your son at that time?
Well, my kids now, let me think. This has been 4 or 5 years ago. So he was like 8 years old maybe.
Wow, what an experience. So, Bobby, in your company, is this what you help people do?
Yeah, so my company, Global Wealth Protection, we basically do asset protection and offshore planning, which seems a bit, vague or whatever. But essentially, we help our clients internationalize their assets. So we offer a lot of advice and consulting to help them move abroad if that's also what they're trying to do. I'd say the core of it is helping them internationalize their assets, which by that I mean maybe establish offshore trusts, offshore foundations, bank accounts, offshore brokerage accounts, storing precious metals overseas, helping them find real estate investments overseas, that sort of thing. So we help them. We call it geo arbitrage. You could also call it geopolitical diversification or multi-jurisdictional planning, but we help them diversify their assets geographically.
Okay, Bobby, I'm going to have to ask this question. Why would somebody want to do that?
Well, I guess being an American, coming from the U.S., you as well, and living in the U.S., we all know that one of the biggest threats to our wealth is litigation, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, last statistics I read, there's a new lawsuit filed in the United States every 16 seconds. 16 seconds. So think about that. There's a new lawsuit filed every 16 seconds. You're at risk. Everybody with any reasonable amount of wealth has significant financial risk to litigation. There's about 1.2 million practicing attorneys in the U.S. with about 600,000 in law school as we speak. So that's a lot of attorneys chasing a relatively, I mean, there's only about 15 to 20 million Americans that have enough wealth to be reasonable targets. So if you have any reasonable wealth, and I'm not talking about super wealthy people, this could be somebody with 10 rental houses that maybe has just a few $100,000 or $1 million in net equity in the property. So these people are at huge litigation risk when they're owning everything in their own name. I mean, maybe you've read the quote. It's actually on our website as well. John D. Rockefeller's quote, "Own nothing, control everything." Well, that's kind of the idea behind it. You get everything out of your name, but you still maintain control over those assets. So litigation is a huge risk. Another is actually geopolitical risk. You can think about that from, let's say, asset seizures. I could tell you countless stories of people that have had their bank accounts frozen because they were being investigated for, let's say, non-payment of taxes. Mm-hmm. I have a very good friend who was investigated for non-payment of taxes, a relatively large sum, a few $1 million, and they froze his assets, froze all his bank accounts, personal bank accounts, and actually also his business, because his business was the one being investigated. So personal and business bank accounts were frozen. He had no access to funds. He had to borrow money to defend himself in court. Spent over $1 million defending himself in court. Fought there like 3 years. In the interim, his business tanked. I mean, almost insolvent. And then he was acquitted. He was basically, oh, sorry, we were wrong, right? Our mistake. But this guy spent over $1 million defending himself, and his business was trashed because of this. So it's a strategy a lot of people use just to establish a nest egg outside of their home country jurisdiction so that those assets are untouchable by that U.S. court system. That's one reason. Of course, taxation is one, but it's very, very difficult to implement tax minimization strategies for Americans, although there are still a few possibilities. And that's, gosh, what else? There's opportunities for investment overseas with the all the bureaucratic nightmares that financial institutions and investment firms have to go through in the United States, you're very limited in your scope of investments. I mean, I could tell you several banks outside of the U.S. that pay anywhere from 3 to 6% interest on U.S. dollar deposits. This is banks outside of the U.S. paying that interest on U.S. money. There's some banks that pay 10, 12, 13% on cash deposits on their local currencies. So, there's huge investment opportunities outside of the U.S. Real estate, especially places like Panama, there's huge real estate investment opportunities there where you can get 15 to 20% ROI on real estate. So, that's just one thing. You're very limited in scope in the U.S.
So Bobby, you've given us a ton of information. Really, the story that you told us, I can totally understand that happening, and that person's business is trashed, their livelihood is destroyed. Even if they're acquitted, people still think, oh well, maybe there was a chance or this or that. It's a terrible story. I feel horrible for that person. But I do have a question, and you don't have to, I don't want to hold your feet to the flames here, but I really do think a lot about this question. Are Americans losing confidence in the U.S.? In our own...
Hopefully.
I'm sorry?
I said hopefully. I definitely think Americans are losing confidence in the U.S. Just in the past, let's see, the State Department statistics from 2012, where almost 2,000 people renounced their citizenship, their U.S. citizenship. Now, that number may not sound large. 2,000 people, so what? There's 300 million people in the U.S. What's 2,000 people mean? But let's think about the 2,000 people that are actually giving up their citizenship. You got the most recent example from just last week. Tina Turner announced she's giving up her U.S. citizenship and becoming a Swiss citizen. So Tina Turner is, a relatively high net worth person who has a lot of money that she is extracting herself from the U.S. political and economic system. You've got people like Eduardo Sabrin, one of the founders of Facebook, who renounced in 2011, right? He's a multi-billionaire. These 2,000 people that are renouncing U.S. citizenship, they aren't your $9 an hour Home Depot sales floor associates, right? These are people with significant assets and significant money. So you have a huge outflow of capital in the U.S. Over the past 3 years, you've had more people renounce their 4 years. More people in the past 4 years have renounced their citizenship to the U.S. than in the previous 40 years combined. So, I think the numbers speak for themselves that people are saying, enough is enough. But it's the people that have the means, the people that have the money that are doing this. Now, certainly there's a huge inflow of people coming into the U.S. from other countries, right? Sure, you got lots of people from Syria or Somalia, or maybe Kenya coming into the U.S., but these people aren't coming in with, they're for the most part not very well educated, and they're not bringing in any significant wealth that's adding to the economic productivity in the U.S. They're coming in looking for opportunity, whereas the people that have made money are leaving. So you can also look at companies. In the past 4 years, you've had more large companies move their headquarters outside of the U.S. than in the previous, almost 30 years. I think it's 28 years or something like that combined. So there's a huge outflow of capital right now, and it's kind of subtle because most people just aren't aware of this sort of thing. So hopefully this can help put some political pressure on the politicians to get something right in their own house and get some fiscal responsibility. But the people that are in the know and the people with wealth, they're figuring it out.
Well, I find those stats extremely scary, and to think that 2,000 people seems like a tremendous amount to me. It doesn't seem like a drop in the bucket. And exactly what you're saying, I think, is true, because the wealthy and the educated from any country could have already been here anyway. So it's not like.
Can I add one point too?
Sure.
When I say 2,000, roughly 2,000 people, according to State Department statistics, have expatriated, renounced their U.S. citizenship. That is based on their own statistics that they provide, which I think are hugely, hugely underreported, number one. I just don't think they have any real grasp on it. You've got people maybe living in Hong Kong that go into the U.S. Embassy in Hong Kong and renounce, and maybe they're not getting that data very well. But even more importantly, you have people who, they're just not going through the renunciation process. They're just acquiring citizenship elsewhere. Maybe they're moving to, well, I'll use Hong Kong. Well, probably not Hong Kong. It's hard to get citizenship there. But they're moving to, let's say, Ireland, for example, where the tax rates, or corporate tax rates and personal tax rates, are actually much lower in the U.S. And they're moving there, getting that Irish citizenship, or somewhere else, maybe Argentina or something. And they're not renouncing U.S. citizenship. They're just not, renewing their passport. They're not paying their taxes anymore. They're not filing tax returns anymore. They've more or less, from the U.S. perspective, they've gone off the grid. So that is a vastly, vastly larger number than 2,000. But there's no way to track that number, because obviously if they're not reporting, there's no way to get a statistic on it.
Right. No, I understand exactly what you're saying, that those are the people that are actually raising their hand. But how many people are just doing it subtly? I'm sure there's quite a bit. So let's just switch the subject a little bit. So, for instance, your business, what could you do for a small business owner that sees this show that says, you know what, he's got something there? What help could you give that small business owner? And also the next part of that question is, what's actually your sweet spot for your target market?
Okay, so I'll answer the second question first.
Okay.
Let's say my client avatar, they're typically around 35 to 55, what I call the working wealthy. They run their own business, or maybe they sold a business and they have some money and they're investing it now, maybe a real estate investor or whatnot. They typically have a net worth somewhere between 2 and 20 million US dollars. So that's kind of what I call our client avatar. But I have lots of clients that are smaller than 2 million net worth. I have quite a few that are larger than 20, but the bulk of our clients are kind of in that sweet spot. Now, to answer your first question, we have lots of entrepreneurs that are looking to internationalize their business, and they're just looking for assistance in restructuring that business. So, excuse me. So, for example, you have maybe some guy from Austin, Texas, who runs a internet marketing business or something, and maybe half of his clients come from the U.S. and half of his clients come from outside the U.S. Well, as it is now, maybe he's running 100% of his business through his U.S.-based company, which means he is he's funneling all of that revenue, all those profits through his U.S. company. So sometimes those guys have the opportunity to move their non-U.S. client base into an offshore entity, for asset protection reasons as well as tax reasons. That's one thing. I've got a lot of clients who they're expats. They've left the U.S. They're people like me that have left the U.S. that live in different parts of the world. They run their businesses more or less virtually, and they have a global client base. And it's tough, if you don't know what you're doing. I mean, you got to think. Let's say you're running, let's just simplify. You're running a business selling T-shirts online. Well, you know your business. You know how to source the T-shirts. You know the screen printing, right? You know how to ship them and everything. You know the ins and outs of your business, but you don't know much at all about how to properly structure it. And you probably have some problems on let's say the business business end of things. So we help clients properly structure that business so that they minimize their risk, sometimes minimize their tax risk as well. A lot of clients, actually I have a lot of US based clients that are real estate investors. I mentioned before the housing rentals. So past year or so, I think it's been a pretty decent market for buying up cash flow properties, rental houses, that sort of thing. I mean, you even have big companies now like Blackstone stepping into the market, buying up hundreds of thousands of houses, scooping them up off the market. So that's a good sign that if the big boys like Blackstone think the housing market is good, they know quite a bit more than, they have a lot more resources than the common guy, right? Like me or you. So, not that you're a guy, sorry.
No, I'm not a guy, but that's okay. I got it.
I mean, rental property investors, they have an enormous amount of litigation risk. I mean, imagine you've got 10 rental houses out there and all of them are deeded in your name. I mean, you've got an enormous amount of risk. I mean, you never know when that next tenant is going to have a meth lab in the kitchen and blow the house up, which, by the way, I've used that example as a joking example for a few years now. About 3 months ago, I had a client that came to me and said that he owned about 20 rental houses in the Texas area. He had that exact thing happen where he had a tenant blow up the house from a meth lab fire.
Well, you know, the house behind me blew up because they were having a meth lab. So, yes, right behind me in the middle of the summer, I heard all the fire engines and all that. I went out to find out what it was, and the house had blown, part of the house had blown up, and it was exactly for that reason. And it was just so strange. And I had no idea. And then the neighbors told me, oh yeah, well, he runs this meth lab. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. It was an old guy too. It's so weird. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the conference, because you have an upcoming conference in Belize. Who attends the conference? What do they get out of it? Give us a little bit about the conference, in case anybody sees it and they'd like to attend.
Sure, okay. So the conference website, if you're looking for information, you can see resort information, you can see speaker information, schedules, all that stuff. It's www.globalescapehatch.com. So globalescapehatch.com. So anyway, the conference is in Belize. It's March 6th through 10th. It's on this little island. For those of you who are not familiar with Belize, it is not in Belize City. It's on this little island called Ambergris Key. And then the little town on Ambergris Key is called San Pedro. So if you fly into Belize City, you actually have to either take a ferry boat out, which is about an hour and a half to 2 hour boat ride out to the island, or you can take a 15-minute air taxi out to San Pedro. But the conference, we call it the anti-conference because it is not the type of conference where you're sitting around in boring meetings in a hotel ballroom listening to people drone on and try to sell you the products. That's not what it is. It's very educational. We have 16 speakers from all over the world. We have speakers coming from, Australia, South America, Central America, Canada, me, Europe. No, I think we have another speaker coming from Europe. We have basically the speakers cover a variety of topics. We have a couple of speakers discussing opportunities and options for acquiring second citizenship and passports, which is a huge topic these days, as we discussed before. Now, that's not the focus of my business. We don't do that for clients. I mean, I know people who do. And for example, that's why we do our conferences, so that we can connect our clients and our readers with those types of people. We have people there talking about offshore private placement life insurance, which actually is a good opportunity for wealthier Americans to actually really trim back or virtually eliminate their U.S. tax burden. We have people there talking about real estate investments, primarily in Central and South America. We have We have a couple of guys that run radio shows that are talking about various topics. One of them talking about real estate. One of them is talking about, well, it's a ethics topic. So it's pretty interesting. It's very educational. Let's see, I know we have an attorney. We've got a guy that runs an offshore bank. I've got myself speaking about developing your own financial fortress. So we've got a variety of speakers, but honestly, more importantly, in my view, more importantly than listening to the speakers is actually spending time and networking with the other attendees as well.
Yep. That's huge. You know, I go to tons of conferences, and that is something that I find is the most important thing, is coming in contact, getting to know people, putting together joint ventures, pulling things together in such a way that you're able to do much more than 2 people or 3 people separately. You pull your resources, you pull your energy, bring your skills together, and up it goes. So you know what, Bobby? Thank you so much for being here today, but we have got to sign off. This has been a phenomenal show. Phenomenal. I've loved it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao. So Lori Flecker from Soltar Solutions here at Focus Forward signing off. Was that a great show or what?